These aren't just haunted places you've heard about, these are real locations where something went terribly wrong. Stay with me till the end, because the truth behind these places is darker than any ghost story you've ever known. I've always been drawn to haunted places, but nothing prepared me for what I felt when I first stepped inside these infamous locations across America. There's something different here. These aren't just ghost stories you read online. Every creaking floorboard, every shadow, every chilling whisper feels alive, as if the walls themselves are holding on to secrets no one dares to tell. Tonight, I'll take you inside 5 places where history, tragedy, and unexplained events collide. You'll feel the fear, the suspense, and the dark truth that makes these places truly unforgettable. Stay with me, you won't want to blink. If you want to uncover more real haunted stories and dark truths, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. 1 Hotel, Los Angeles, California, USA. I had always heard stories about the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, but nothing could have prepared me for the feeling that hit me the moment I stepped inside. The building looked old, almost frozen in time, with peeling paint and long, narrow hallways that seemed to stretch forever. It was quiet, except for the occasional creak under my feet, which made my heart skip a beat. Something about the air felt heavy, almost as if it carried the whispers of all the people who had lived and died here. As I walked down the dimly lit corridor, I kept imagining the infamous stories I had read. The guests who vanished without a trace, the mysterious deaths, and the dark rumors surrounding the place. My imagination started to run wild. Every shadow on the wall looked like a figure standing there, watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just the flickering lights, but deep down, I knew the building had its own story to tell. I reached the elevator lobby, and it felt colder here than anywhere else in the hotel. My hands shivered, and I realized that every instinct in my body was warning me to leave. I thought about Elisa Lam, a young woman whose mysterious death had made this place infamous around the world. I remembered watching the elevator footage, her gestures and movements eerie, as if she was hiding from someone, or something. Standing there, imagining her last moments, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was aware of my presence, almost alive in its silence. I decided to explore the stairwell, hoping to feel the atmosphere more personally. The smell was musty, like old wood and disinfectant mixed together. I could hear distant echoes, but when I looked around, there was nothing, only long shadows stretching down the steps. My heart raced faster with every step. I felt both terrified and compelled to keep going, like the building wanted me to uncover its secrets, slowly revealing its dark history with every corner I turned. At one point, I paused to lean against the wall, catching my breath. I could almost feel the weight of all the events that had happened here pressing down on me. The hotel wasn't just a building, it was a collection of memories, tragedies, and unanswered questions. And even though I was just one person standing there for a few hours, it felt like the hotel had already known me, had already been waiting for me to feel a fraction of its dark truth. When I finally stepped out onto the street, the sunlight felt foreign and almost wrong. I kept looking back at the hotel, its dark windows staring silently at me. I didn't hear anything, but I knew the Cecil Hotel had left its mark on me. It wasn't about seeing ghosts, it was about feeling the weight of history, and knowing that some places carry more than just stories, they carry the echoes of real lives lost, mysteries unsolved, and a darkness that lingers long after you leave. 2 Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Weston, West Virginia, USA. I had heard about the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum long before I ever set foot inside. But nothing could have prepared me for the feeling that hit me the moment I walked through the massive iron gates. The air was thick and cold, almost heavy with the weight of hundreds of years of suffering. Every step on the cracked concrete echoed through the silent courtyard, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I paused for a moment, trying to steady my racing heart, but the history of the place pressed down on me like an invisible hand. As I entered the main building, the smell of old stone and dust mixed with a faint antiseptic lingered in the air. I walked slowly down the long, narrow hallways lined with rusted iron bars, imagining the patients who had spent decades here in isolation. Thousands of people had lived, and many had died within these walls, some forgotten, some recorded only in fading ledgers. I could almost hear the whispers of their voices carried on the wind through the broken windows. I stopped at a long corridor that had once held patients in solitary confinement. The story said some people were left there for years at a time, with barely a glimpse of sunlight. I imagined how it must have felt to sit alone, day after day, in silence and darkness, slowly losing touch with reality. My stomach tightened, and I shivered, not just from the cold but from the sheer weight of knowing the suffering that had taken place here. As I climbed the crumbling staircase to the upper floors, my flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I could see outlines of doors, some hanging crooked on their hinges, others sealed shut. Each room held a story, some tragic, some horrifying, and some I could never fully understand. I paused at one door, imagining the patients who had screamed in terror, or cried silently in despair, their pain echoing long after they were gone. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling became that I wasn't alone. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through a broken window felt alive, like the building itself remembered the tragedies that had unfolded here. I tried to remind myself I was alone, but my heart wouldn't calm. I realized this place wasn't just a building, it was a vessel of history, of forgotten lives and untold suffering. By the time I left, stepping out into the cold West Virginia night, I felt different. The asylum wasn't just a haunted location, it was a reminder of human fragility, of suffering hidden behind walls, and of the stories that continue to haunt even centuries later. I kept looking back, even as the gates closed behind me, feeling the weight of history pressing down, and knowing that Trans-Allegheny had left its mark on me in a way that no one could ever erase. 3 Villisca Axe Murder House, Villisca, Iowa, USA. I had driven for hours through the quiet roads of Iowa before I even saw the Villisca Axe Murder House. The town was silent, almost too quiet, with only the occasional rustling of leaves breaking the calm. As I turned onto the street where the house stood, I felt a sudden chill. It was like the air itself was warning me, whispering that this place held something I wasn't prepared to face. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but there was something in its stillness, an almost tangible weight that made my chest tighten. I stepped onto the porch, and the wooden boards creaked under my feet, each sound echoing unnaturally in the empty street. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing, but I felt eyes on me. I reminded myself that it had been more than 100 years since the murders, yet the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I could imagine the night of June 10, 1912, when 8 lives were taken brutally with an axe, and how the townspeople must have screamed in horror when they discovered the scene the next morning. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and dust, but there was an underlying coldness that made my skin crawl. I walked slowly from room to room, imagining the family sleeping, unaware of the danger that had silently crept in. Every corner seemed to hold a story, every shadow looked like it belonged to someone who had never left. I tried to focus on my flashlight, but it trembled in my hand, and I realized my heart was racing faster than I could control. I reached the bedrooms upstairs and paused. I could almost hear the echoes of that night, the panicked footsteps, the muffled cries, the unimaginable terror. My mind kept playing scenes from old newspaper articles I had read, and for a moment, it felt like I was not just an observer but a visitor to the night of the tragedy itself. The air felt heavy with sorrow and anger, a mix I could sense but could never fully understand. I sat for a moment in the corner of one room, trying to calm myself, but even as I breathed slowly, a strange feeling of presence surrounded me. It wasn't about seeing anything, it was about feeling. Feeling the lives that ended too soon, the pain left behind, and the unresolved mystery that still hung over the house like a shadow. I knew I would leave, but the house would leave a mark on me forever. As I finally stepped out into the faint light of evening, I glanced back at the house. It looked quiet and ordinary again, but I knew better. The Villisca Axe murder house carries its darkness, its whispers, and its tragic stories. And even though I had left, I could feel it following me in my mind, a chilling reminder that some horrors never truly fade away. For the Stanley Hotel, Estes Park, Colorado, USA. I had always been fascinated by old hotels, but nothing could have prepared me for the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. The first time I saw it, standing tall against the mountains with the evening fog rolling in, I felt a strange mixture of awe and unease. The air was crisp and cold, and even though the sun was still setting, shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. I parked my car and took a deep breath, feeling like I had just stepped into a place where time didn't quite move normally. As I walked toward the grand entrance, the wooden floors creaked under my feet, and I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me. Guests and staff had reported strange occurrences for decades, and the hotel's fame as the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining made every shadow feel like it had a story. I tried to convince myself it was just imagination, but my stomach tightened every time I glanced at a long hallway or a darkened corner. I explored the rooms quietly, moving from one corridor to the next. The hallways seemed endless, and each door looked like it was hiding secrets. I imagined the guests who had stayed here years ago, unaware of the odd footsteps, whispers, and doors that opened on their own. I paused near a window overlooking the mountains, and for a moment, the wind sounded like a faint voice calling my name. My heart raced, and I couldn't help but shiver, feeling a presence even though I knew I was alone. As I walked up the grand staircase, I noticed that every corner had its own atmosphere. The old chandeliers cast long shadows, and the faint scent of polished wood mixed with something else, something I couldn't identify. I felt drawn to one of the upper rooms, where stories said strange events happened most often. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I could almost hear whispers, as if someone invisible was sharing memories from decades ago. My mind kept flashing images of past guests, their laughter, their fears, and maybe even their regrets, lingering long after they had left. By the time I stepped out into the cool mountain air, night had fallen completely, and the fog had thickened around the hotel. I looked back at the illuminated windows and felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The Stanley Hotel was more than just a building, it was alive with stories, memories, and shadows of the past. Even though I had left, the hotel had left its mark on me. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow felt like a reminder that some places carry more than just history, they carry emotions, echoes, and the untold truths of the people who once walked their halls. 5 Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. I had been fascinated by prisons for years, but stepping into Eastern State Penitentiary was unlike anything I had imagined. The massive stone walls rose high above me, cold and unforgiving, casting long shadows as the afternoon sun faded. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, carrying a strange mix of dust, decay, and something I couldn't identify, maybe the echoes of decades of suffering. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. The first hallway stretched farther than I expected, lined with iron cell doors that had long since lost their paint and polish. Each door had a small barred window, and I couldn't stop imagining the men who had been locked inside for years, sometimes in solitary confinement. The stories of mental breakdowns, punishments, and despair seemed to cling to the walls. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump. As I moved deeper into the penitentiary, I came across the old solitary confinement cells. I crouched inside one for a moment, feeling the cold stone against my skin. It was hard to breathe, the air thick and heavy, and I could almost hear the distant screams and whispers of the inmates who had suffered here. I imagined the isolation breaking minds, day after day, and it made me shiver uncontrollably. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move just outside the bars. I climbed the narrow staircase to the upper tiers, where the light barely reached. The corridors twisted and turned like a maze, and each cell seemed darker than the last. I could almost feel the presence of the prisoners, lingering long after their time had ended. The penitentiary wasn't just abandoned, it was alive with memories, pain, and unresolved energy. I paused to catch my breath and realized that every story I had read about the place, the torture, the despair, the infamous inmates, was somehow tangible here. When I finally emerged into the cold Philadelphia evening, the penitentiary looked silent and still, almost ordinary from the outside. But I knew better. Eastern State Penitentiary carries the weight of countless lives, tragedies, and haunting memories. Even hours after I left, I could still feel it pressing on me. The loneliness, the suffering, and the dark truth that some places never truly let go of the people who lived and died within them.